Hello my darlings. Today I'm going to show you how to make a little sewing kit. I've sold lots and lots of these at craft fairs and they're relatively simple to make, although they're kind of time consuming. So what you're going to need to start with is we're going to make the pin cushion. So let me put this down and show you what I've got. So this will be part one of the sewing kit, which is basically how to make a pin cushion. So I'll title this How to Make a Pin Cushion, but you're going to have to come back to it to complete the project. So I've cut a piece of fabric. This happens to be 8 inches long by 4 inches wide. And I believe, let me measure it and make sure I'm telling you correctly. Actually, it's 10. It's 10 inches long by 5 inches wide. And whenever you make a pin cushion, you're going to wind up making a cylinder, and the measurements are always that the width is half as much as the length. So in this case, it's 10 inches long, 5 inches wide. So the first thing we're going to do is sew the side seams together to make our cylinder. So let me get started on that and I'll come back in a minute. I've got some nice red thread, and my thread is doubled on my needle. I've got a knot on the end, and so I'm going to make a stitch just by pulling the needle through. Don't have to have a big seam, 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to go over the same stitch to reinforce it, and just because I'm paranoid, I'm going to go over it again, but this time I'm going to go out of the fabric the length of another stitch. You'll see what I mean in a minute. So then it basically looks like this. Now I'm going to go to the end of the first stitch that I made, pull the needle through, and come out the length of another stitch, which is in the back, which you can't see in the front. So now it looks like this. And so I'm going to now go to the end of the second stitch that I made, pull the needle through, and out again about the length of another stitch, which is in the back, and you can't see it in the front for right now. So it's going to look like this. So I'm going to go through this whole seam in that fashion, and then the side seam will be done. Okay, I'm back again. I've sewn my side seam. This is what it looks like. It's not the neatest job in the world, but it doesn't matter because it's going to be on the inside. And here's what it looks in the back. This, I don't know what it's called. I call it a back stitch. So now I'm going to pick a side. I've got a cylinder, as you can see. And I'm going to make a gathering stitch, which is very simple to do. You simply start your needle and you leave a tail of maybe 4 inches is good. And then you just make a running stitch like this, going all around the one end of the fabric. You're going to do the same thing to the other end, but not quite just yet. So it doesn't take but a minute to finish this. And then I'll show you how to pull the gathering stitches together. And then we're going to turn it right side out and stuff it with some polyfill. And I have a technique that I developed myself about the polyfill, which makes it much easier to draw the needle through. This is a good size pin cushion for a jar lid. Okay, so now I'll cut my, actually I'm going to leave it, the needle on the thread. I'm going to pull it thusly, make a knot a couple of times. And just to reinforce it, make it a little bit stronger, I'm going to go through the gathers and just kind of stitch through a few times. And this, of course, is to reinforce it. And then I'm going to take, oh, did I get out of the frame? I'm sorry if I did. Then I'm going to take my needle and just crosswise go through. And then on the other end, other side, go through crosswise. Oh, it's a little hard to pull through. And before I pull the thread all the way through, I've got a loop here. I'm going to go through with my needle through the loop. And I'm going to cut the thread close to the needle. Separate the two threads. And make a knot a couple of times. And cut off that excess. Now, I'm going to turn it to the outside, is on the outside. Whoops, and it looks like this. And then take my polyfill and stuff it about 2/3 of the way up, which I'll finish in a minute. I actually need to get some more polyfill. But what I do is sort of make, stuff it as a donut, I guess. I try to leave sort of a hole in the middle, which makes it ever so much easier to pull your embroidery thread through when you get to that step. So let me finish this and I'll continue. All right, so I've gathered the other end of the pin cushion in the very same fashion. Now I've only got, maybe 80% of the polyfill in. So before I completely gather it, I'm going to stuff it with some more polyfill. Fortunately, I had some in my craft closet. I was very happy to see that. So again, I'm going to stuff it in, want it nice and firm, and with my finger, I'm going to continue creating that little hole in the middle so that when we do the embroidery thread, it's easier to push it through. With that amount of polyfill in it, I'm going to pull the gathers and kind of judge if that seems to be enough. And I believe it is. Okay, so kind of make sure the stuffing is nice and firm in here. I'll put this away. Or you know what, I think I'll put a little bit more in. Again, making a hole with my finger in the middle to accommodate the embroidery thread. There we go. All right. Finding my ends. And I'm pulling the embroidery thread from both ends, where I started and where I ended. And this is kind of difficult because it doesn't want to stay. So I'm going to I left my needle on. First thing I'm going to do is make a loop and pull my thread through, and then pull it. And you can't pull too hard because you don't want to break your needle. because that'll break the gathering stitches and you won't be happy. Okay, so now that I've got it sort of together, I'm going to take my needle and go around the outer edge of my gathering stitches. This part is likely to wind up being the bottom because it's not as pretty as the other side where the gathering is on the inside. So I'm almost done here. All right. Now I'm going to tie it. Actually, at this point, I can cut my needle off. Tie it several times. Actually, tied it 3 times, and I'm cutting off my excess thread. Whoopsie. Okay, so now it's time for the embroidery thread. I've got some red embroidery thread, and back to these needles. I got these at Walmart, and they come in 3 lengths. I'm going to use the 4-inch length, so I'll get that out of the package. I keep it in the package because that way I can find the needles more readily, and I've got this pin to hold the cut part together, the open part together. So now, how I determine the length of the embroidery thread I need, I just pull the length out, and starting at the middle, I wrap it around what is going to be our pin cushion 8 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and cut it there. This will ascertain, I don't know how I figured this out, trial and error, I guess. This will ascertain that we'll have plenty of embroidery thread to do our 8 divisions. So, threading this together. This can be single, doesn't have to be double, but I use all 8 strands of the embroidery thread. The embroidery thread that you buy always comes with 8 strands to make it nice and firm. So, because this is what I call the pretty side, I'm going to call this my top and this my bottom, the one I just completed, because the gathers are on the outside. So I do need to make a knot on the end of my embroidery thread. Actually, we're going to cover several knots, make several knots in the same spot or near the same spot. That's 2, that's 3. Okay, so I'm going to, on the bottom, I'm going to put my embroidery needle through a portion of the fabric toward the center. And this will get tangled as you're sewing it, so you need to be careful of that. So, okay, so I've got the knot, and I've got a little tail on the knot, which will come in handy later. It'll help to tie it off. So now I'm going to take my embroidery needle and go straight down through the pin cushion, and it should come through the center, and it came out beautifully through the center of the top of my pin cushion. And once again, as I said, it kind of tends to get tangled, so you have to be careful with that. So I made my same pass through, and now here's my seam. So I'm going to cover my seam with the embroidery thread. And what I'm attempting to do now, I'm back at the bottom, I'm going to push the needle through, come out the top. Doesn't have to be perfect, but very close to the top anyway. try to watch this so that it doesn't tangle. And on the opposite side of the thread that I just made, I covered the seam actually. Trying to keep it straight. I'm going to make another division, thereby having 2 halves of the pin cushion. Once again, drawing it through, trying to keep the thread as neat as possible when you come through, otherwise it'll tangle up on you. So now my pin cushion is divided into 2 halves. Half one, one side of half one, one side of half two. So it's got one side and another side. So now I'm going to take the embroidery thread and divide the half into halves. So now I'm going to have quarters, and it's the same process over and over again until you have 8 divisions. So now that you get the idea, I'm going to stop and do my 8 divisions. And okay, then I've made my 8 divisions. Kind of looks like a pumpkin. Actually, I have used the same technique to make pumpkins for fall, for Thanksgiving, for Halloween, and I'll be making a video about that. So I decorate the top and they come out just beautifully festive. Okay, anyway, that's another subject. So I've still got my embroidery thread on the needle, and if you don't have a button jar, shame on you. Everybody should have a button jar. My grandma had one, and make sure that I always have one. And so I went through my button jar, and I was lucky enough, yay, to find a button that is a little heart shape. I don't know how well you can see it, but there it is. And it's got a, I don't know what you call that, a shank, I think. A shank on the back of it. So, but anyway, so I'm going to take my needle, I'm going to make sure that I'm on the prettier side, which I am. And the bottom actually still has the tail that I started with. So I'm going to take my needle, run it through the shank of the button, and then go through from the top to the bottom, getting it in the middle again. Okay, and see how much I have left? That gives me enough to finish the project off and not be short to where I'm struggling trying to make the final stitches. So anyway, so there's the button. Hope you can see that. Looks very pretty. I'm pulling it tight through the bottom, and now I'm going to take a couple of stitches or more through the bottom with my embroidery thread. 1, 2, and I can take my needle off now. And if you remember, I had the tail to begin with. Let me cut this, it's way too long. I had this much left over in case any mathematicians out there can figure out how many times to wrap the pin cushion to get the proper amount of thread. Anyway, this is a comfortable amount to have left over, in my opinion. Okay, so now I'm going to take both ends and make a few ties to secure it. 3 is my normal number when I'm securing thread. 2, 3. All right, now I'm gonna cut it. And now you have just a beautiful, beautiful pin cushion to fit on top of your jar. It's going to, whoops, it's going to turn into a little sewing kit for just light sewing. If you have to sew on a button or fix a hem or whatever, they make great gifts, and I've sold literally dozens of these at my craft fairs. So, okay, I'm going to stop now, and part 2 will be how to put together your sewing kit and how to prepare it.